Hello, everyone. I probably don't need to speak that loud, do I? I'm just a natural sort of projector of my voice. Is that too loud? We okay? Cool. So hi, I'm Alex Spencer. I'm the features editor at Edge Magazine. And I'm obviously the person in a slot, which is a very dangerous place to be. But joining me, arguably more importantly, is the enormous head of Ted Price. I mean, unless you wandered into this room by mistake, I don't need to tell you, Ted is the founder and president of Insomniac Games. And yeah, is Ted, Ted is there.
Yes, hi. Alex, nice to see you.
Hey, so how you doing?
Good.
Cool. So I guess the best place for us to start maybe is talking about, what that title actually means. It's been over, at the risk of making you sound old, like over a quarter of a century, right? Since Insomniac was founded. So what is your sort of day-to-day role today, and how's that changed?
Well, it has been over a quarter century. It's actually been about almost 30 years since we started up. And back in those days when we did start, I had the chance to actually create content for our games. And our first game was Disruptor. And I was lucky enough to help build environments and do some animations on it. And after Disruptor, by default, I ended up being the creative director for a lot of our games. And I tried to contribute however I could. But as we grew, I became a bottleneck, and I wasn't particularly good at letting go creatively. And more importantly, as we grew, I needed to spend a lot more time focusing with other company leaders on how we could tackle games that were getting significantly bigger and more complex. And going back to your question, even though I love the creative process, it made much more sense for me as we grew to focus on more behind the scenes stuff like negotiating contracts, helping with long-term strategy, building company structure, budget, staffing, and of course, developing culture. And what I found was that while building game content is incredibly rewarding, helping build a stable environment and removing roadblocks for creative teams is just as rewarding for me, at least. And today at Insomniac, we've got over 400 folks. We have 2 locations here in the United States, one in Burbank, California, one in Durham, North Carolina. And we're working on some very high profile games. We recently announced Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine for the PlayStation 5. Today, I do feel very fortunate to still be involved in a way with production. I still play our builds. And on Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which was one of our recent games, the team actually allowed me to participate in helping review weapons for the game. I wasn't making any content, but they actually listened occasionally to some feedback that I had, which was a blast. But a lot of my focus today is on our cultural development. In other words, I work with other leaders at Insomniac to constantly improve, not necessarily what we make, but how we make it in a sustainable and healthy way.
And that's what we're going to be talking about a lot today, the cultural stuff, the sort of structure. But you mentioned the games. Insomniac has already released 2 games this console generation, which is a bit of a feat. And you've got, as you say, 2 more announced. You mentioned structure, like how is Insomniac? Are you structured in a specific way to make that kind of multi-stranded project work? Is that a change for you guys?
It's a good question. We've launched 3 games for this generation so far, so we've definitely had plenty of challenges to tackle with our structure. But I think what's helped is that we've been working on multiple games at the same time since around 2003, which is when we began production or pre-production on Resistance, which was a game for the PlayStation 3. At that time, we were also working on our Ratchet & Clank PlayStation 2 games. So we had to change pretty drastically to support multiple games in terms of how our structure was set up. And a few years after that, we started our second location in Durham, North Carolina, which meant that we changed again. So today, we have a matrix structure, which essentially is 2 sort of leadership structures. We have a project structure and a department structure. So each project is headed up by a creative director and a game director who work together to sort of shepherd the vision, and they work side by side with a project manager who oversees the schedule. At the same time, we have content creation departments like art, animation, design, audio, UI, UX, and many more working across multiple games. And each of those departments has a department manager. And within each department, we have teams of content creators who are dedicated to projects. But being a part of a department means that there's knowledge sharing across all projects when it comes to technique. So overseeing the whole studio, we have a senior leadership team who represents production, HR, creative, community, tech, and finance. And we all work together to set strategy and ensure that we're all moving in the same direction. One thing that's also important when it comes to structure is how people move through the structure. So I want to talk for a second about how our career paths work here and how people do move through the organization. When it comes to advancement at Insomniac, we actually support 3 different leadership tracks. We have people leaders who focus on helping individuals balance their workloads, plan their careers, and stay healthy. We have craft leaders who advance the techniques that we use to make awesome stuff. For example, we might have a principal engineer who develops forward-looking rendering techniques for our engine. And then we have project leaders who focus on setting the direction for a whole project or maybe one aspect of a project. So for example, a creative director or an art director or a mission director. So that's a super vast description of our structure, but it's always evolving and it's never going to stop being a work in progress.
Okay, so that's the sort of larger structure side of things. But when it comes to production, you said you've been a multi-game or multi-project studio for a long time now, but obviously the scale, the scope of those games has grown enormously, as of the AAA industry. What has that done to your production process? What does that look like today?
Well, like our structure, our process has definitely evolved over the years, and that's been thanks to a lot of feedback and iteration from Insomniacs. And I think lately we've landed on a process that's been working well. And we take inspiration from other companies and other industries. And what I'm going to share is probably very similar to what other people do. But what's key for us is that we now try to follow it for all of our projects consistently, which is not something we always did. And we had this process and we apply it similarly to all projects so that everybody knows what to expect and uses the same terms. So very simply, we divide our project into 4 phases. We have first an R&D phase where we experiment with all sorts of stuff. We have pre-production where we try to find the fun by nailing down mechanics and macro and our story. Ultimately, this is prep for the next phase, which is production, ultimately building the game. And then we have a post-production phase where we are polishing and tuning and fixing bugs. Now, this production phase, where most of the work happens, is divided into what we call slices. These are relatively short periods which culminate in a milestone delivery where we can play through discrete chunks of the game. And these slices are essential for us because they force us to stop and take a look at what we really have. We ask ourselves, are we on track? Do we need to course correct? So that actually works well for us. And like most developers, we have key milestones throughout the production cycle, things like vertical slice, alpha, beta, gold. And alpha is a really important milestone for us. How alpha goes usually dictates how post-production goes. And getting to a solid alpha where the game is feature complete, where we're getting close to starting polish is excellent in theory, but it's tough in practice to actually have a feature complete alpha. And so one of the biggest enemies of a solid alpha, at least what we found, is feature creep. And I know that every developer in the room knows exactly what I'm talking about. This is where a lot of the tension arises because it's so easy to add just one more thing which might make the game a little better or continue polishing a feature beyond what's reasonable. I do think we've gotten better with every game. I remember on one of our Ratchet games back in the PlayStation 2 era, we completely rebuilt a boss from the ground up about 2 weeks before we shipped the game. We don't do that anymore, but it helped us understand how important it is to have a solid early milestones so that you really can polish as you're heading towards the end. Another thing that we've done to help hit that all-important alpha is to introduce a pre-alpha several weeks before, which gives us a shot at really making sure that true alpha is playable. And I could talk for days about production, but I also kind of want to talk about some moments that I think have been really important for us in terms of creating this process and how it's helped get us to where we are today. And I think that there are a lot of moments for us, but I'd like to just share a few that have had a huge impact on us. Is that okay?
Yeah, take us through the kind of pivot points or however you kind of want to present it.
Okay, so it helps illustrate how we've gotten from where we were 27 years ago to where we are today. And I think the first major evolution for us was after we released our first game. Our first game was called Disruptor, as I mentioned before. It was something that was a real challenge for us to finish, but finishing it was such an accomplishment, because most companies that start up, they find that building your company and building your first game is seriously tough. And when we released it, we were very proud of it, but it was called the best game that nobody's heard of by a couple of outlets. And so we realized that we probably needed to change course if we were going to be successful. And that led to Spyro the Dragon, which helped put us on the map. Another big moment for us was when we became a multi-project studio with Resistance. This happened almost 20 years ago, and it allowed us to rethink how we were structured. But more importantly, it provided more creative opportunities for Insomniacs who maybe didn't want to work on Ratchet games for the foreseeable future. Maybe they wanted to do something different, like a first-person shooter. And so starting to develop multiple games in parallel really helped us creatively. Another key moment was when we rebuilt our engine and our tool set from the ground up. This was with a game called Fuse. Fuse opened a lot of doors for us in terms of our tech. We actually built our original tech when we were tiny, and with Fuse, we took the opportunity to work with our much larger teams to create tools that reflected a more modern workflow and worked a lot better for the much larger games we were building then and were planning to build. Plus, having a multi-platform engine at the time was essential for us. And I got a couple more, if that's okay. Okay, well, I'm going to go for it. I'd say another really big moment for us was when we worked with Marvel. We joined forces with them, and when we did, it was a watershed moment. And working on licensed IP was never something we considered. But when Marvel said, hey, we're interested in your vision for Spider-Man, it was an opportunity that fired up Insomniacs. It's led to Spider-Man and Miles Morales. And now, as I mentioned, we're working on Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine. And Marvel is a fantastic partner, as is Sony, which leads me to my sort of last moment here. Joining Sony has been bar none the biggest moment in our history. And while we operate the same way we always have, officially being part of the Sony family has brought so many benefits to all of us. As an example, collaborating with the other first-party studios like Naughty Dog, Guerrilla, Sucker Punch, Band, Media Molecule, London Studios, Sony Santa Monica, Asobi, San Diego, I'm going on and on, sorry. Along with all the other new studios that have joined, is really a joy for us because we love sharing and we love collaborating.
Cool. So that's kind of, we've talked about the nitty-gritty of production, how that's changed, and you talked about sort of company structure. But I guess we need to come back to the C word. It's something that obviously is very important to you. Culture, it's something you talk about on your podcast, the Game Maker's Notebook, which, if you haven't listened to, is a very good series of interviews with, designers, writers, composers, but vitally, I think, other studio heads, right, and other people in sort of similar positions, and culture comes up a lot. So why is it such an important issue for you personally, I guess, is the place to start?
First of all, thank you for bringing up the podcast. The Game Maker's Notebook is something that was created by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, and I'm one of 3 hosts. The other 2 are the truly awesome Robin Hunicke from Phenomena and the extremely talented composer Austin Winnery. They're fantastic people, and their interviews are great. And all of us get a chance to interview our developer peers and friends in the industry and ask them the kind of questions you might not see in press interviews. Just in general, I think as an industry, we're really great at sharing best practices when it comes to craft. In other words, how we develop our games. But it's rare, in my opinion, that we share our cultural best practices. So back to what you asked me, my motivation is to personally hear more about what's working and what isn't at other studios so that we at Insomniac can learn. And yes, I have selfish motivations, but it's really great to hear. And that's why I love asking questions about culture. And what I see again and again is that we all struggle with some of the exact same challenges. For example, we all deal with constant change in the development world. It's just there. We all have to cope with failure when things don't work out the way they would, because very few things work well the first time. And we're constantly going back to the drawing board and trying different stuff. Another thing we all struggle with is carving out time for improvement of our systems while we're moving at warp speed trying to develop our games. It's a real challenge, and we all share them. Most importantly, though, when we figure out solutions to these problems, I don't think we should hesitate to share openly. And so when I ask my friends and peers about culture, it's because I believe that if we can all share more about what we're trying, what's working and what isn't, it can definitely help the whole industry.
It strikes me it's probably worth sort of defining terms here. You've talked around the kind of issues that we're talking about, but sorry, I dropped my pen. Actually defining, culture as a term is that a fixed thing, or does that vary, do you think, from, what it means to studio person to person?
It's a great question. Culture definitely has a lot of, I think, definitions. To me, culture is simply how people interact with each other day to day. And interacting with each other is literally how we make games. And I think with a handful of exceptions, no game would exist without collaboration between people. Usually it's a lot of people who are collaborating. So for me, at least, it's important to constantly ask, is our culture or how we're interacting with each other healthy? Is it helping us make better games? What do we need to do to improve?
And you've talked a little bit about the challenges, but I think, specifically, I think when we talk about culture in this industry, we're talking about, a lot of it's talking about problems, right? It's talking about the things that can happen, especially, some of these problems are endemic across the industry, but I think particularly in AAA and, especially as, again, the scope of games grows and complexity grows, what exactly what problems do you think are key to identify and for us to sort of, be addressing as an industry?
Yeah, you're right. I think the hardware continues to get more powerful and things grow. And that's exciting for us and for players. All of us, I think a lot of us got into this industry because it's so cool that we get to work on these amazing pieces of technology and make these beautiful, huge worlds. But I think that also means with this advancement of hardware and tech, expectations continue to rise year after year, which often leads to bigger teams. And bigger teams usually means it takes more effort to communicate well and keep everybody heading in the same direction. And doing that consistently is really hard. Furthermore, I think because we all love our craft dearly, there's often a strong desire to have everything turned up to 11. And if we're not careful, everything in the game becomes the most important thing. I think one of the challenges we run into is that when we can't prioritize, schedules and budgets balloon, and it becomes really hard to finish. And that can lead to frustration and an upset in the balance between delivering something that's excellent and the well-being of one's team. And well-being is so important to me, and I think to Insomniacs and to most developers, it's so important to have a healthy culture. So we talk in Insomniac a lot about well-being, and we talk about what things could lead to a decrease in well-being, especially as teams grow. And some of them include not understanding the why. I put why in quotes, but the reason behind decisions, or feeling like you have less control over your workload than you'd prefer, or being in a constant state of production stress with no time to take a step back and plan or look at the big picture. I've experienced all these things personally. Our teams have experienced it. Most developers in the world have experienced these things. So they're important to tackle. But I also want to point out that I do believe every person has different stressors, and there's not one magic fix for increasing well-being that's going to work for everybody, which that's why I think it's so key for us to encourage things like regular face-to-face one-on-ones for every team member and their manager. That one-on-one time gives each team member an outlet to discuss what's going on for them specifically, and know that they're talking to somebody who can make a difference, someone whose job is actually to help increase their well-being. It's something that we haven't always done, but now that we are, it's not just helping us improve culturally, it actually helps us improve our processes for production, since we have another avenue where team members can share ideas. Another important aspect of like helping improve culture while these games grow is encouraging and promoting self-care. It's a place where we decided to double down. And for example, we host monthly wellness, well-being events where we focus on things like mindfulness, meditation, relaxation, sometimes art therapy. We hold quarterly cultural meetups that we call Common Grounds. And lately we brought in guest speakers who shared approaches for empathy and resilience. We've also created a dedicated well-being space on our internal site with tips, as well as ideas from leaders on how people practice self-care. And at the same time, and I think this is a very related topic and important, we need to help remove the stigma around mental health issues and anxiety and make it safe for people to speak up about it. So at Insomniac, we focus on that too. And some of the things we do include ensuring that health and mental health and self-care is covered by our insurance. And I'll give huge props to Sony on this, because Sony's insurance is fantastic when it comes to covering mental health and self-care. We promote mental health weeks. We, again, have Common Ground meetings quarterly with visiting experts to talk about mental health. And I'll share that one of the benefits I appreciate the most personally is our telemedicine benefits through Teladoc. which are 100% covered and unlimited when it comes to mental health coverage. And I bring this up not as a sort of a marketing speak, because I know it sounds like I'm just listing benefits, but I think that during the pandemic in particular, where people have been so isolated and have trouble, knowing where to turn and who to talk to, having access to mental health care, whether it's through telemedicine or other means, is so important for well-being. But ultimately, the biggest challenge we all face is figuring out how to build these huge, complex, incredible games while staying healthy. And therefore, for us and for any developer, achieving a balance between excellence and well-being is, at least in my opinion, a crucial goal.
So that balance that you're talking about there, like, is delivering, is delivering an excellent product naturally working in opposition to well-being of people? And like, yeah, you clearly said it's a balance, but like, are they in opposition, and how do you find that balance?
It's a tricky one. I do think that they are naturally opposed sometimes. And so to tackle that balance, I think committing and then acting to doing so is acting to actually do it is key. So for us in Insomniac, this means starting with annual goals for the company that have this balance built in, and then using those goals to drive action. And I'll share two of our goals. One is to increase well-being and reduce burnout. So what are we doing in those areas? Well, in that area, one is that our leaders are held accountable now for checking in on safety, well-being, and career pathing for every team member. We also now do regular well-being surveys, and then we act on what we discover. For example, we know through these surveys that planning and scope are areas of improvement that Insomniacs would like us to act on. So we've taken some actions. For example, we've added a planning week to the beginning of every milestone, where we're not just diving right into making content. We're actually taking a step back, asking the team to participate in planning out the next several weeks, which sounds kind of like a no-brainer, but it's really hard to do when you're moving 1,000,000 miles an hour in production. But it's effective. We also have project virtual office hours, where a few times a month, project leaders will answer any question from team members live. And it's a great chance for people to connect on topics like scope. So I mentioned our first company goal. Another company goal of ours that we've endorsed is to support sustainable productions. So this for us includes bolstering our shared teams. And we have teams like visual effects and audio and lighting in our core team who are working across multiple projects. And it's really important not to stretch them too thin. So we've been making sure that they have enough folks to handle it. It also means a commitment to not pulling people off of one project to finish another, which I think every developer in the world probably has done if they're a multi-project developer, but it's a commitment we're making, and we're making sure that we're avoiding this. So when it comes to goals, the individual goals that people have at Insomniac reflect our company goals, which means ideally that balancing excellence and well-being becomes a part of all of our conversations, especially when we're talking about scheduling and scope. And this is relatively new. And while we are seeing improvement, we won't know fully what's worked and what hasn't until the end of our fiscal year. But it's important that along the way, we're sharing our results, our progress, and our failures transparently with our team. With that in mind, I know that one risk of being responsive and transparent is that pendulum swings can occur. And it can be really easy to overcorrect when you're identifying problems and trying to attack them. So that's one of the reasons we need to constantly get feedback from the team on how things are working.
Okay, I want to come back to that thing you said about sort of the seesawing, but like just quickly, like you said about this will show in the results. Can you just explain what you kind of mean by that? Like what kind of results you're talking about?
Well, the pendulum. You mentioned the seesawing. I think that it's, first of all, sharing results is important, and getting that feedback is key. But while we are deciding what to do, I think it's useful to acknowledge that our culture is organic. A company's culture shifts as new people join and others leave. Ideas and perspectives from new folks help us evolve, and they add to our culture. And I think that we can't be afraid of change. What we need to be afraid of is stagnation, right? In game development, we're making things all the time, and we try and we fail frequently. So we should be able to do the same thing with our culture. We should be willing to try different things and see if they work. And we do try a lot of things, and they don't always work. But that's just part of this, dealing with the pendulum swings that exist in our companies and in society.
Okay. And other sort of, I think commonly discussed sort of culture and culture-related issues. I think one of the things we have to address is lack of diversity in the industry, right? It's something that has come up, in a fair few sessions I've sat through today. And I'm aware that I asked this question as a white male. I asked this question of a white male executive. How do you square those two things? I think you talked about this being something that's important to you and to Insomniac, but how do you? Yeah, is it a blocker to change? The fact that ultimately, at the top, you are you.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. It's a great point. And I think this is an issue that's recognized across the industry and that a lot of developers, including us, are tackling it. Back when we got started in the early 1990s, a lot of us making games represented our audience. And fortunately, the audience has changed significantly. Today, as I'm sure you've been discussing at the conference, every culture, every race, every gender has embraced games, which is amazing and fantastic. And we need teams that are as diverse as our audience. So there are a few very specific things that we're doing to tackle this at Insomniac. So one of them is that we require that for any new position, at every stage of the interview process, we have diverse candidates included. That's an important, very important move for us, and it's really helped improve diversity and increase diversity. We also ensure that our interviewer pools, the people who are sitting down and interviewing new job applicants, themselves have diverse representation. Another thing we're doing that I'm really excited about is that we're eliminating higher education as a requirement for almost all of our roles. And this means that if someone can't afford to obtain a university degree, experience is a valid substitute. We're also hiring a manager of culture and belonging who can help us increase diversity awareness here and start new programs. We have a fellowship program where we bring in diverse experts from outside our industry to help in production and provide different perspectives. And they'll stay for, say, the duration of a game's production. And then we're definitely reaching out to more diverse groups through direct connections and by participating in conferences like the AfroTech Gaming Summit or the Grace Hopper Conference or Game Developers of Color Conference and many, many more.
Okay, and I think when we're talking about diversity, one of the things we have to talk about is like a cost of, a traditional or historic rather lack of diversity in the industry. If we look at this year, obviously a major conversation has been the allegations of harassment across the industry. I just wanted to sort of know what your stance is on that.
Yeah, I don't think any organization is immune from toxic behavior. And I think we have a lot of work to do as an industry and as individual companies to ensure that every person feels safe. At Insomniac, we're not perfect. And creating a safe environment where people can speak up is absolutely key. What we've learned over the last couple of years is that we can do better in ensuring that every single person clearly understands our policies and all of the resources that are available for support. So I'll share a few things that we've been doing lately. We've established a code of conduct for our leaders and for all of our employees. We have clear and frequent education on our harassment policies. We've even diagrammed out the investigation and reporting process so that if somebody brings a claim forward, it's really clearly understood how it all works. With that in mind, we also have established third-party reporting options so that people, if they're reporting something, don't have to go through company channels. Another thing I'm really, really happy about and proud of is that Insomniac women and LGBTQ plus leaders have stepped up to offer support to employees who have any questions, which is wonderful. I mentioned earlier, too, that we have people managers, and part of their responsibility is regular check-ins on safety with each of their team members. Another thing that we've done is if there is a complaint lodged, we have a 30, 60, 90-day check-in program to ensure that there's no retaliation for anybody who brings forth a concern. And this just ideally puts people's minds at ease. And then finally, we explicitly state in all of our leadership job descriptions that leaders have a responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of their team members, and they have the responsibility to address discriminatory or harassing behavior. And we hold leaders accountable for this because it's part of their job description. And these are just a few things that we're doing. We are constantly asking Insomniacs, what more can we do? How can we continue to improve here? I'll share that a realization I came to recently is that it's really easy to take safety for granted. Our default as developers can be to just focus on game development and assume that everybody knows how to act responsibly. But as we've grown, I've realized that efforts to keep any workplace safe and healthy is a never-ending task.
So, I mean, yeah, it's great to hear that those steps are being taken because they are clearly a necessity. But you know, sort of winding back a bit and talking back to the point that you were making about much earlier about the final product versus well-being of staff in terms of I guess we're talking about crunch culture, we're talking about overwork. You also mentioned feature creep earlier, and I think that's kind of it'd be interesting to kind of talk about how those two things meet. From your point of view, what happens when you're presented with, when you reach that impasse? There's a hard choice between, we've committed to this feature, but we've committed to this timeline, but also we don't want to hurt our employees.
Yeah.
Is it a choice between an inferior product and keeping people healthy, or is that oversimplifying it?
No, I don't think it is oversimplifying it. You're right. We face those choices all the time in the games industry. And I think this is where the problem-solving skills that we all have grown up with as gamers get a real workout. I think that the default is to brute force the problem. In other words, to throw money or people at it. But that can actually lead to more chaos and affect well-being, which of course goes against what we're trying to do, which is to balance excellence and well-being. So I think the harder and more effective solution, in my opinion, is to get creative within constraints. And with that in mind, if you're interested, a great book to check out is called A Beautiful Constraint by Mark Barden, which I think is not about our industry, but man, it is so relevant to everything we do in development. I would suggest everybody read it. But going back to how we try to tackle things, when we run into this collision between excellence and well-being and trying to make choices within constraints, the ideal process is that we first identify the most important thing that this feature that we're talking about provides for players, and then clearly define the time and resources we actually have. If we don't have enough time or resources, then now is a chance to get creative, to come up with several new ways to deliver that one important thing in the time we have, and do it in a way that might be unexpected. And part of this is reminding ourselves again and again that we need to drop any preconceived notions about what this thing should be and what players want. This is a chance to do something that truly is different. So this process that I'm describing is the ideal. Does it happen all the time? Absolutely not. In the stress of heavy production, I think we often feel like we can't take our foot off the gas pedal, but that's often what it takes. And moreover, I think the team needs to have permission to pause and take the time to come up with a better way instead of bulldozing through the problems and causing real health issues. And an example I mentioned earlier was having a planning week as part of our milestones, which is something we probably wouldn't have considered in the past. Another good example is the Doc Ock boss in Spider-Man 1. Originally, we were going to feature a fight that took you all over New York City, and it was way out of scope. And the temptation existed just to brute force it, to put our heads down and run through the brick wall. But the team took a step back and they thought about what was important to players. And that was the breakdown of this relationship between Peter and his former mentor, Dr. Octavius. They rethought the fight and they realized that we didn't need to destroy half of New York to pay off the relationship. In fact, it would have worked against what we were going for. So as a result, the final battle, if you played the game, became much more up close and personal and has a far bigger emotional impact than what we had planned. And it actually fit within the time we had. I want to mention one more example. Another example of getting creative within constraints is that during the pandemic, we needed to record a lot of VO, but the recording studios were closed because of COVID. So our dialogue lead, Patrick Mahalik, designed and built a portable VO studio that we could actually drop off safely at actors' homes. We did remote sessions where the game directors were directing remotely in real time, but we got fantastic high quality audio, the actors stayed safe, and we were able to hit our launch date. So this permission I'm talking about to be creative within constraints needs to come from the leaders who set the tone for the project. I think when we all repeat the message and reassure our team members that it's okay to try new things and fail, it gets repeated and becomes part of the culture. I've seen this in action, and it's incredible when it works. But it does, however, take constant repetition because I think we default to old habits, like using brute force when we're in the depths of production. But succeeding here, and I know it's really hard to do, ideally results in a better game and a healthier team at the end.
So obviously, we talked a lot about how things have changed at Insomniac, and a lot of that seems like it's change that has been kind of decided upon and driven by you and your team. But there is obviously another major change that's happened in recent time that we should probably talk about. The pandemic happened, and that obviously has hit everyone, and it is affected studios, I think, in every studio in a different way. But like, I just wanted to know, what does that look like for Insomniac? Like, how did it affect the way you guys work, and how have you kind of pulled things back to, or where we are today?
It's a great point. The pandemic has absolutely affected a lot of what we do. So as a result, we've responded, and one of the things we've done is we placed an even bigger emphasis on leadership training, since working remotely has definitely introduced new challenges, especially when people are isolated. So, for example, we've instituted new coaching with a fantastic leadership trainer named Kate Gygax. She's also worked with Naughty Dog and other development studios, and she's helping our leads focus on leading with empathy, which is great. We're also building out mandatory manager training program, which covers a broad range of leadership-specific skills that our teams specifically have said that they'd like to see. And this ranges from allyship to conflict resolution. Again, it's all about this connection between the leaders and the team members, and ensuring that it's stronger than ever because so many people are remote. And another thing that we do to ensure our teams stay healthy is we ask all of our people managers, our people leads, to check in regularly on well-being and safety with each team member, and also to ensure that each team member's workloads are balanced and establish clear career paths for every member. This is all a work in progress, but it's progressing well, and it's something that we've realized is incredibly important, especially as I said, we've all been remote. Another thing we do is that we put together programs that encourage more casual connections between Insomniacs, things that mirror what we would be doing if we were all in the office. And a couple of examples include coffee chats, where we have just one-on-ones, which are all voluntary, and people get together on Zoom and just talk about games, movies, what they're doing, their hobbies. It's great. It helps take the place of those impromptu get-togethers in the office. We also have town halls, where we have guest speakers come in virtually to discuss non-work topics that are important to Insomniacs. We have virtual office hours, which I mentioned we do on a project basis, but we also do this for departments, where leaders can hang out in a Zoom room and answer any questions that may come up at all. People can pop in and pop out. It's like being in the office. Another thing that's key for us and has changed because of the pandemic is that we've completely embraced remote work options long-term. So we offer options for people to work fully remote or fully in the office or in a hybrid fashion, meaning sometime in the office and sometime at home. This flexibility is what our team has said they want, and it gives everybody an option to decide what work arrangement is best for them and for their own personal situation in life. And it works great for us. But I also want to point out that every studio is different. I mean, some studios absolutely may be better suited to working together physically. So I think one of the reasons it worked well for us is that prior to the pandemic, we had multiple offices. And this meant that we were already doing a lot of teleconferencing across the country. The pandemic gave us a chance to get even better at working together in different locations. And since this question has a lot of potential answers, so I'll keep going here. We've made a big investment in tools and tech that support more efficient remote development. So like most teams, we've embraced Zoom, Teams, Slack as primary communication tools, but we've also beefed up our internal tools that we create and our network to support more efficient distribution of our builds. And we also have a variety of remote solutions for different groups within the company who have different needs, from being able to remote into much more powerful workstations that are in the office to having laptops that are also powerful that can be used in a hybrid situation where people are working in the office and outside of the office. And all of this is thanks to an incredible IT and facilities team who's been supporting so many remote Insomniacs during the pandemic. And this has been going on for a long time, so I really appreciate it. I'll just mention a couple more things. I think we've gotten better at tackling big, seemingly insurmountable problems with confidence because of the pandemic. And a couple examples are back in March of 2020, like most companies, we had to go remote fast. We took several hundred people to fully remote and operational in just 3 days. And I thank the IT and our facilities department for this. And we also shipped 3 launch window titles for the PlayStation 5 while fully remote, which again was something that seemed like an insurmountable challenge, but the team was able to get creative within constraints and solve the problem. And these things have helped us build confidence to tackle bigger challenges like balancing excellence and well-being while making some pretty high-profile games.
Great. Well, Ted, I've been given the signal to say it's sort of wrap-up time, so I've just got a last couple of questions for you. You know, I'm sure in the room, you know, obviously there's like to be a lot of people, you know, working in the industry. Obviously, that's kind of the point of develop. But if we specifically talk first, I guess, about devs who are just starting out, right, in this industry, just starting out along the path, what kind of golden advice do you have to share with them?
I chuckle because I can imagine that some younger developers may be looking at me and asking, what does this guy know? You know, I don't know who he is. He's old. He's not in my generation. And that is totally true. And I get it. I would probably think exactly the same thing if the situation were flipped. And I also will admit that every startup situation is different. And Insomniac hasn't been a startup for a long, long time. But hopefully what I can share is useful. And any advice I offer is usually the result of mistakes that I made and things I wish I could have done better. So here we go. First, I would start by thinking hard about what you want for your culture and make some early commitments to it by establishing policies and budgets which reflect it. For example, if well-being is important to your culture, what practices are you going to follow to ensure that everybody stays healthy? I didn't think about this for years. And then how will your organizational structure reflect that commitment to well-being? Another suggestion I'd make is to establish a vision statement which helps you make decisions every day. We did not have one for years, and it was definitely a missed opportunity. Today, our vision statement is to create games that have a lasting and positive impact on people's lives, and we actually use it to make big decisions, like establishing goals that focus on well-being. So, in my opinion, it's important to have a vision statement because it can be a compass that everybody uses to prevent rework and make sure the games are better and make sure that people stay healthy. A couple more things. I would set aside time to talk about culture as a company regularly. You know, ask what's working, ask what isn't, and be okay with hearing what isn't working. And then finally, last piece of advice, be comfortable with evolving and build an acceptance of change into everything you do because everything changes. You know, I think that over the last couple of years, we've seen that reinforced pretty heavily.
So that's kind of, you know, advice for people just starting out, but we've talked, you know, hopefully we've hit quite, you know, we've hit a few sort of big topics today and you know, kind of hopefully sort of gone through a full view on those, but, and where Insomniac is, I guess, specifically. But how much of those sort of solutions that you found and how much of the kind of learnings, I guess, are they specific? Are they particular to Insomniac, or are they something that, you know, people can freely rip off? Are they just, you know, are they applicable to the whole industry, or at least the whole AAA industry, I guess?
I hope people rip them off. I mean, the whole point of sharing what's worked for us and some of the things that happen is just so people can use them to help us all, you know, raise our industry. And in my opinion, anybody should be able to use what I'm saying. Just like when we're listening to other studios share, there's always something that we can apply at Insomniac. So, you know, what I've learned, Alex, is that whether you're just starting out or you're 3 decades into it, constantly evaluating and then evolving your culture is essential to keeping people healthy and happy. And I also think it's important to recognize that society influences our corporate culture. Now, based on how fast today's society is moving, I think a strong focus on culture is essential for any company in our industry. We can't ignore culture in favor of what it is that we're producing. But to flip that idea around, I also think that corporate culture influences society. Since so many people spend most of their waking hours as part of a company or an organization, the culture we create within companies has a huge effect on society. And again, this is just my opinion and maybe a crack theory, but I do think in today's world, well-being, diversity, and safety aren't just buzzwords. They're core to a successful and healthy society. So for many of us, corporate culture bleeds into our lives. It can affect what we teach our kids, how we interact with our friends, and how we participate in society. So I think how we talk about diversity, well-being, safety, and other cultural topics in our companies can set the tone for how things happen outside of our companies. And finally, talking about companies, I want to just acknowledge that no company is perfect. You know, all companies are made up of individual humans with their own ideas, their own beliefs, and their own approaches. And this is the beauty of being part of a society and part of any organization. Ultimately, I do think when we can embrace our differences and give each other the benefit of the doubt, we do make progress. I also believe that if we have the will to be introspective and tackle our cultural problems, and we all have them, then constantly problem solve and share what we learn, we can make a lasting and positive impact inside and outside of our industry. And as a final thought, Alex, I'll share this. I do think that today, as game developers, our legacy isn't just the games we make, it's also the culture that we create.
Great. Well, I mean, that seems like a perfect note to leave it on. Ted, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And yeah, everyone, I've been saying this for a while. Thanks for coming to my TED talk. So yeah, as I alluded to at the start, it is now officially beer o'clock. I don't need to stand between you and the most important part of the day anymore. So thank you very much. Yeah, see you in the bar.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate being here.
I'm not sure if it's too early. But...
Yeah.